Good morning, traders. This is Christian from Tribeca Trade Group with a quick video on looking at some technicals in NVIDIA. First things first, risk disclaimer. Please read that full risk disclaimer. Everything I'm going through here is for information purposes only, not giving out any investment advice or recommendations. This video is for education purposes only. So let's take a look at the technicals here in NVIDIA really quick. Now, I've seen it, so I'm going to talk about like what you're hearing on maybe Twitter versus what you're seeing on your screens. Right. So first of all, I don't have any position on in my trading account in NVIDIA. I do have a longer term. I have a holdings in and what's known as my TTG trend portfolio. Right. But it's a small weight. It's 2% weight of the portfolio. All right. So there's my disclosure about whether or not I'm holding this name. But I see a bunch of people on Twitter say, oh my God, that's not a Head and Shoulders, right? It can't be a Head and Shoulders. And we've seen this before with NVIDIA, and it's reached the neckline and it's bounced every time. Right? Okay, that's fine. But past results have nothing to do with what the future lies. And if you're going to rely, so I'm going to say this a couple times in this quick video. If you're going to rely on technicals, then rely on them. If you're not going to rely on technicals, then don't rely on them. So take, for example, what I've got drawn here is a trend line here. To me, that does look like left shoulder, head, right shoulder. And I'm very well familiar with there. Sometimes there's a lot of things that look like head and shoulders and they're not, and they bounce back. So number one, I would watch the neckline. Now, what else do I have drawn on my charts, right? Well, I've got the MarketWebs value areas. So this tells me if something is inside a range, above a range and breaking out, or below a range. Right now, it's below a range, right? And on the short, again, this is shorter time frame, right? Because we're just looking for the month on what the value area for the month is telling me. Right now, it is broken below, right? So it's trending down again in the short term. Long term, it's still above the 200-day moving average, and it looks fine long term. I'm talking about the short term here. All right. What else do I have on my charts? Well, I've got the 5-day, 20-day, and 50-day moving average. Again, they just give me a sense of overall trend. One of the things that I talk about is when things are below their 5-period moving average, they're trending down in they're trading down in the short-term trend, right? And what I usually do is wait for things to reclaim their 5-period moving average, right? If you've done something similar with the 5-day moving average, then you usually wait for confirmation that things get back above their 5-period moving average. It tells me that buyers are coming back into the name. Now, if you're going to go out on a limb and say, oh, well, that's not that I don't care about that it's a possible head and shoulders, or that it's trending below the value area, or it's trending below the 5-period moving average, and it's trending below the 50-day moving average, right? If you're not going, if that's what you're going to say, then you should just take these things off your charts, because either you're going to use them to help you trade or you're not. Now, could I get involved in this name? Sure. Where I would get involved personally for a trade, I'm not saying I'm going to do this because I think that there's better names right now, but I would at least wait until you get above the 5-period moving average because it shows that buyers are getting back involved. Also above the trend line because that would negate that this is a head and shoulders pattern. But right now it is what it is. Look at the lines on the page and give a second to say what it's showing you, right? Instead of doubting it and using your own judgment, for now it's a head and shoulders pattern below the neckline. Again, if it gets back above the head and shoulders neckline, then it's not a head and shoulders. But you have to kind of respect things as is, right? Instead of this judgment that I see everybody doing, right? Again, if you're going to make these judgments, then don't look at any technicals. All right. So all I'm doing in this video is just throwing in a little bit of dose of reality because I see people make exceptions all the time. Right. I was talking about a number of things yesterday. Right. And they're like, oh, well, that doesn't matter because of this. Right. So I'm not going to use that because of this. Right. If you're going to constantly make exceptions, then maybe you shouldn't even be using the thing to begin with. All right. So that's what I'm looking at for. And ultimately, what I would really like is for NVIDIA to take its time and maybe get back above the 50-day moving average and start to build and then break higher. But there's no reason for it to for me to mess with it here because what's the next stop down on the daily chart? It's a VPOC down here and it's a 200-day moving average. How far is that away? right? That's about 10% away, right? So again, why am I outlining areas above and below, right? Because as traders, you should be a risk manager, right? Not just out there making calls, right? So so I'll leave it there for now, but that's my quick thoughts on NVIDIA. I'm in no rush.